Congressman Mike Gallagher is on the line. Hey, good morning, my friend. How are you?
Morgan, it is great to be with you. And every week, Hugh insults my Wisconsin sports team. So my hope is that you'll be more generous and civil than the evil Hugh Hewitt is.
Well, I don't know anything about the sports ball, so I can't. I wouldn't even know which team to insult, so you don't have to worry about it. I think the Packers are in your state. Is that right?
This is correct. Yes, that's good. You're
And
doing
and
great.
that's
Yeah, that's good
football.
sports
And they're
ball
football,
reference.
right? Okay, good. Yeah.
Football is
Look,
football, yes.
you
Which
know
is
what?
not
Our
soccer.
beloved.
That is a different sport and a bad sport. So that Europeans play.
Yeah. You're Marine, I'm Navy. Our beloved Navy got killed this weekend, so that. This is why I don't get into sports. You just get your heart broken. Listen, something much more important, actually, that our audience should pay attention to. So you run a bipartisan committee. It's very rare to have anything bipartisan coming out of the House. We actually just had Mary Catherine Ham on talking about the bipartisan healthcare legislation that passed yesterday, and also another rare bipartisan achievement in the House through your committee, the Select Committee on China. You laid out what I read was 150 different recommendations for what the United States should do as it relates to our dependence on China. I'm just going to give you the floor to explain to our listeners what this new report says.
Well, yeah, indeed, it's rare to get bipartisan agreement on 5 recommendations, let alone 150. So I'm very proud of the work that went into this. I mean, it means by definition that not everyone got what they wanted. We had to make compromises, but I think the report shows you can have principled compromise without compromising your principles. But more than the 150 number, I think the real important number is 3. We have 3 major pillars of the report that represent not just a laundry list of proposals, but a blueprint, a strategy for how we win this economic and technological competition with the Chinese Communist Party. The first pillar is about resetting our economic relationship with China. For 25 years, we've gone with this lie that China's economy is a market economy permanently. We recommend revisiting permanent normal trade relations and actually reinserting Congress into the discussion, which we used to have to annually vote on the status of our economic relationship with China. The second pillar is about preventing American capital and technology from enabling the Chinese military advances and the CCP's human rights abuses. And the final pillar is about how do we build here at home? How do we reindustrialize? How do we innovate? How do we build collective resilience in our supply chains along with our allies? So this is a big win for the Select Committee. The next step is to take all these recommendations, turn them into legislative reality, and push for an actual vote on the House floor on some of the most important things early next year.
And where do you get pushback from? Like, because to me, it seems like, and everybody listening, this is all common sense stuff. We know that Republican and Democratic administrations say that the Chinese Communist Party is the biggest competitor, biggest national security threat, right? They're the only one that can pose an existential threat to the United States. So it would seem, I think, very prudent to almost everybody that we should not be funding, the PLA, their military. We should not be economically dependent on them. But surprisingly, you actually get a lot of pushback from this in Congress. So where does that pushback come from?
Well, I think the primary pushback comes from outside Congress, but then works its way into Congress through really disgusting lobbying efforts. The primary pushback comes from Wall Street and corporate America, people who have massive financial and business interests in China and just don't want to do anything to upset that. And it really doesn't matter how aggressive Xi Jinping gets. If he raids a corporate office, if he holds American businesses hostage, if he effectively makes every business in China beholden to the whims of the party, if he inserts CCP members into the corporate governance structure of every major business in China, these voices still loudly say that, we can't do anything to push back and defend ourselves. They even go so far as to host Xi Jinping for $40,000 a pop at APEC and give him standing ovations, notwithstanding the fact that he's perpetrating a genocide and threatening a war with America over Taiwan. Right. So that's the primary form of pushback. I guess the more fair form of pushback is there are a lot of people here in America that fear the retaliation of the Chinese Communist Party if we were to, for example, have a more aggressive tariff regime, if we were to do something about their intellectual property theft. The concern is that they would retaliate against American farmers. I just would argue that shows how dependent we've become on the Chinese Communist Party. And as difficult as it's going to be to extricate ourselves from this economic relationship now, the longer we wait, the more difficult it becomes. And so that's why we need to make hard choices now, so they're not able to weaponize that dependency in the future.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought up the American corporate leaders that gave a standing ovation just a few weeks ago to Xi Jinping when he was in San Francisco. There was a conference called APEC for people who pay attention to these things. And to me, I thought it was just one of the most shameful things that I'd seen come from the business community, from corporate America, to have American business leaders give a standing ovation to a man who was currently overseeing a genocide in Xinjiang. I'm so glad you brought that up. You know, for our listeners, Mike, who are tuning in and sort of saying, you know what, I want to stand up to the Chinese Communist Party. This all sounds amazing. This recommendation, this select committee, 150 different recommendations, legislation coming out. What can the average American do to sort of be a part of the effort to rid ourselves of our dependency on the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, I think the most obvious thing is to support and vote for candidates who have a clear-eyed view of the threat we pose from China and who won't equivocate on that matter. And we have very important races that are going on, not just the presidential race, but key Senate races like that in Pennsylvania, where Dave McCormick just released last week a very detailed, very strong plan for how we beat China. He called for repealing permanent normal trade relations. He would be a fantastic addition to the Senate, and I would draw your listeners to the speech he gave last week. I thought it was phenomenal. So candidates like that, who have a clear view of the threat we face from the CCP, who have a plan for combating the CCP, and most importantly, in my opinion, are going to do what's necessary in order to invest in our hard power, the things we need to do to revitalize our military, rebuild our beloved Navy, which desperately needs to be rebuilt in order to deter a war that has the potential to make the current wars in the Middle East and Europe look like child's play in comparison.
You know, you've talked a lot about this. You and I have over the years about the threat of the PLA and really the sophistication of the Chinese Navy. And we just are not keeping up at pace with them. We can't build aircraft carriers. We can't build submarines to keep at pace with them. So Chairman Gallagher, how do we, as a Navy, as a military, how do we look at actually deterring China from invading Taiwan if we're not keeping up on the military production side, munitions, you name it, whatever it may be?
The first thing to note is that the Biden administration's plan, or lack thereof, for the Navy has us bottoming out at about 279, 280 ships in 2027. That's the worst possible time for our priority force, the Navy, to be at its weakest point, because that's the date that Xi Jinping has given his military commanders to be ready for an invasion of Taiwan. So the Biden plan is total garbage. We haven't had strong leadership of the Navy under the Biden administration. And that lack of a consistent demand signal is part of the reason why we can't build 2.5 Virginia-class submarines a year, or why we're not, near moving to, building 2, eventually 4 frigates a year. We need a clear plan for the future of the Navy that is resourced and supported by not only the Secretary of Defense, but the president, and we have not had that. That is the fundamental problem. The other thing I would say, you referenced munitions. We need to do what China did to us, which is not just build a Navy, but build what I call an anti-Navy. Long-range precision fires that can sink ships for relatively low cost. Things like the long-range anti-ship missile, SM-6, JASSM, Naval Strike Missile. All of these things we can turbocharge production of. We can stockpile them west of the international date line in the Indo-Pacific, and we can hold the PLA at risk for relatively low cost. That is our best near-term deterrent strategy as we invest in a bigger Navy over the long term.
Yeah, listen, I can't think of anything more important. And by the way, we're facing all of these challenges, keeping up with the Chinese military, why we have a recruitment crisis at home and we have people who don't want to join. Well, just want to thank my friend, Chairman Mike Gallagher, for being on the show. Let's all pay attention to that report.